the last video wouldn't let me finish all 15 minutes because I forgot to sign in. But let's get this done. There's only a few more. Once you understand this entire paragraph, you're pretty much set for what's going on with Darwin. So a few things that you need to understand about Darwin. Sorry, that's a cat walking by. Go away, cat. What mechanism allows population of a certain species to overpopulate? First off, why do we talk about overpopulation at all? Okay, it's something that naturally happens. Organisms always reproduce more than what the environment can support because not everybody gets to survive and reproduce. Not everybody, not all the offsprings get to survive. So in order to allow the entire species to keep on, exist and not go extinct, overpopulation has to happen. But now, what mechanisms allow overpopulation to happen is reproduction. Okay, it's some simple right here. The next one, what generates variations in a population? First off, mutation, and then in the next video we'll talk about all the other ways that variations can happen. But ultimately, the bottom line is mutation has to be there in the first place to allow genes to vary, right? We said alleles are different variations of a gene. So let's say you have the hair color gene, the different alleles that allow us to have different colors of hair comes from mutations. So mutation is a word that you should always be thinking about. The next one is, do individuals evolve or does a population evolve? So these are all questions that you encountered while doing one of the homeworks. Is population. You would never say an individual evolved. An individual can change. The evolution is, the definition in terms of genetics is change in allele frequencies within a population over time. So allele frequencies, you can only have allele frequencies if there are different alleles, but if you're only one individual, there would not be different alleles. Whoa. What's happening? Now, the next one is, does evolution happen because a species wants a certain trait? The answer is no, with that many O's, because it's so much no, okay? Evolution doesn't happen because we want anything, right? You can want wings. We as a population can want wings. It won't happen because evolution is constrained by the mutations that naturally happens. There's mutation. Mutation is something that happens all the time, but evolution in the means of natural selection is these different variations has to exist in the first place. If we don't have people with wings existing in the first place, we can't evolve to have wings as a whole population. Does that kind of make sense, right? Like, does that make sense? These variations, let's say the giraffes can't want long necks. The long necks existed in the first place because of the mutations that allow them, that allow the gametes to code for the trait long necks. And then natural selection selects which ones get to survive and reproduce, and it was only the long neck giraffes that got to survive and reproduce more successfully than the shorter neck giraffes. But the long necks has to exist in the first place. Wanting a certain trait is not gonna do anything. Okay. So we've seen number 3, we've seen number 4. Now, number 5 is, what are the 3 patterns of diversity I don't know what's going on with this sentence. Darwin note, okay? So we already talked about it. Species vary globally. When he went to these different islands, he saw that different species of finches look different. Species vary locally as well. If you look in the classroom, we're local. However, we still look different from each other. And species vary over time, right? For any kind of species, let's say spiders. I was just reading about this. Spiders nowadays are larger and producing larger eggs than they did in the past. And this is because spiders are really striving under, human civilization, because there's so much leftovers by human and spiders can eat it. So species vary over time because natural selection does select for certain traits. And then over time, there's going to be a change in allele frequencies, which is we call microevolution, at least. Now, what are some factors that allow natural selection to happen? There's the struggle for existence, like we said earlier. overpopulation, lack of food and resources, there's predators around, there are diseases. So the struggle for existence is what allows only some of the individuals to pass on their genes. So if you remember this pepper moth situation, we have originally we had variations within the population of the gray moth and the dark moth. But then the result is, because of the struggle of existence, not every single one of these moths are going to survive and reproduce. So then over time, you're going to see this change in the traits. Okay. So here's an explanation that's already written down for you. So make sure you're not memorizing these. You really have to understand how evolution works, right? And if you don't, watch the video, my video again, watch some of the online videos again, and figure it out before one day. Since there's limited resources and overpopulate, more individuals are born than survive. So that is what overpopulation means. More individuals are born than can survive. But the limited resources and competitions and all that creates this struggle for existence, and you feel it, this struggle, the struggle in life. And then there's also variation within the population caused by mutations in the first place, and adaptation. Adaptation means if you're adapted to the environment, that means you can survive and reproduce more successfully than those that are not adapted. So if you read through this, individuals within a population vary, they're different, and some are more adapted to the environment than others, either due to their own issues or due to something in their genes. And if it happens that these, more adaptable traits, such as long neck for giraffes, is caused by genes that can be passed on to the next generation, then those genes will be passed on. So it says, and those adaptive and heritable means those genes can be passed on. Those adaptive and heritable variations are passed on from one generation to the next. Okay, that's variation and adaptation. The last one is called survival of the fittest. An individual that is fit, you have to know what fit means. It means that the individual can survive and reproduce more successfully in the environment. So it's all determined whether you're fit or not. This is determined by the environment. It's not determined by your own will. Over time, individuals that are more fit get to survive and reproduce and pass on their genes. As a result, the allele frequencies in the population change. So if we go from big A, little a of 70-30% to big A, little a 50-50, that's an allele frequency change within the population. So we know fit. A few more words. We talk about struggle for existence. We talk about this. We talk about this. It's all good. Now, almost done. What do we mean when we call all species? Oh, descent with modification. This is real important. So we say that all species on Earth are descent with modifications. We're all descent with modification. I am, you are, my cat is, not my cat, Marshy is. We're all descent with modification because we're descendants of our ancestors, whether it's in the sense of, you're the descendant of your parents, grandparents, all that, but we're also descendants of our ancestors, such as the ancestors of the human beings. So being a descendant allows you to have similarities among individuals within the population and between you and your ancestors. For example, human beings, we have a lot of similarities. I have arms, you have arms, I have fingers, you have fingers. Our ancestors had fingers and arms, right? Those are because we're descendants of our common ancestor, we have similarities. However, there's also modifications caused by mutations and everything else. We'll talk about the everything else in the next video, but the modifications allow us, the mutations that went on within each of our ancestry line allow us to be different from each other as well. So, okay, make sure that you know that we're talking about living and extinct. Even if a certain species went extinct, there's still descent with modification from their ancestors, although they no longer exist, but when they did, they were still descent with modification. Now, what is speciation? Speciation is the process of new species, developing from an ancestor. So if you have an ancestor and this ancestor diverge into two different species, This event is called a speciation event. If you only say a change in allele frequencies over time, that happens every generation, right? You can call that microevolution. Let's write this one down. Microevolution, but speciation is called macroevolution. There's so much change that now we have different species. The last one, what's the difference between natural selection and artificial selection? If you're watching this video, bonus point for you, because we didn't talk about this in class, but you should probably know anyway. Natural selection is done by nature, right? There's a certain environment of the nature that allows certain species to be better at surviving and reproducing and passing on their genes more successfully than the other ones. I've said this so many times, you better be able to say this as well. That's natural selection. It's based on the environment. Artificial selection doesn't just mean that humans creating a certain environment for other species. It's that we are actively selecting for a certain trait, right? So if you're only sleeping in your bedroom and this, you roll over, you kill a spider because you rolled over and killed it, that is not called artificial selection. It's just, you're not actively selecting for this spider to die. It just died by accident. But the process of us selecting traits that allowed us to breed dogs, for example, that's artificial selection because we're actually actively selecting the individuals that are surviving and reproducing. Okay, that's the end of evolution 1. Continue on and watch evolution 2, and you're going to do great on Monday.